Alright guys, hello, welcome back to today's art talk, and it's not a tutorial but more of an art talk and probably like a short tips or more like a long tip on how to improve on your art and your skill. So how do you improve fast, right? So that's one of the biggest questions that everyone has. Now, one of the things is one of the main topics that I'm going to cover today is philosophy. I know it sounds a bit different, like weird, like it's an art talk, but talking about philosophical ideas. But we'll get to that. Like, it kind of makes sense in the grand scheme. So let's just talk about what I'm doing right now. So this, you guys might find weird, but this is like a very old school way of like plotting out or creating like some grids for your composition. Now, if you notice in most of my videos, I never keep a lot of UI elements on my Photoshop or Krita or even Clip Studio Paint. Where I'm using something, I try to keep the UI very minimal. I try to go for that full screen kind of a mode. Now, if I want something, I'll probably like get those kind of an elements out. For example, let's just pause this and let's look at my Photoshop. Now over here. Now we're going to talk briefly about keeping it minimal. Okay. So one of the things that I don't like is cluttering your Photoshop like this. Right now you might say that, oh hey, but then you can just go this way. But then again, when you come out, there's like all of this UI, which is like just cluttering the whole space. Right now, I don't like that. So I usually close out everything that I don't need. So I don't use adjustment layer, so I close that. I don't use styles, so I close that. I don't use swatches, I close that. I don't use history, I close that. I use properties, but I just let it out sometimes, but I close that too. All I keep is channels, layers, my tool settings, probably this guy. Yes, you can float it out, you can keep it down, you can dock it, and just this. That's my UI. So when I'm going out and back, I have the entire screen to work with without my UI cluttering. So keeping it minimal. Another thing, keeping it minimal is I usually like to work everything in one layer. I don't like to, or even if I'm making layers, I would come to a point where I merge all of those layers back in and I will paint on top of it. So I used to keep like a lot of layers when I used to work as a concept artist, but now I just keep it very simple. The next thing is using very minimum brushes. So in most of my videos, I use this brush. Okay, this is my sketching brush. Then probably I would use this guy. This is my default painting tool. I would use this guy, and probably this. And of course, the softer the round brush. So it's just a round brush, but then you have the soft brush inside it. And that's it. These are the only brushes I use. So again, very minimal. Now, as we are going through this painting, you would see that I'm starting off with my very textural, sketchy kind of a brush to go with what that thing is, right? Now, using so little brushes to get those things done, using just one layer or a couple of layers and then merging everything down flat is what is called doing what is difficult. Now, if you don't do what is difficult, then you're not learning anything. Now, there is a quote by Musashi, and mind you, like I love Musashi, so there'll be a lot of Musashi quotes. And what he says that it may seem difficult at first, but everything is difficult at first, right? You might find that just using the round brush, just using an opaque brush with no opacity jitter, no size jitter is difficult. But then the more you use that, the more easier it becomes, right? Now, if you guys are wondering what type of brushes to use and stuff, I will leave a link below. It's a video where I talk about brushes and how brushes are working. Okay. Now, the next thing comes is the most important is practice. Okay, so the first point was keeping things minimal. Don't use a lot of layers, don't use a lot of adjustment layers, don't use the color balance tool, right? Try to pick the colors directly from the color sliders or directly from the color wheel, whichever you choose to. And if you want like an in-depth video on colors, I have made that as well. I'll leave the link in the description. Now, don't use all those fancy layer groups. Like for example, right now I just picked a wrong color, or and it was like a bit more warmish or something, and I chose another tone. I'm using just a flat brush. There's no uh, opacity or size to draw it, and I'm painting directly by choosing the colors on the color slider, right? So that's difficult, but then the more you do it, the more you learn, and the more it becomes a habit, and it improves your confidence. Now, where was I? All right, so the next thing is doing what's difficult is now using color adjustment layers, now using the levels and all that stuff um, as like an adjustment layer on top to edit out. Just use one layer. Think of it as if you're sketching and painting on a piece of paper and see how far you can get away with that. Now, the last thing, not the last thing, the second last thing is what I would say practice. Okay, now over here, practice or training. Okay, now this is something that people just take it very lightly. They think that practice and training means that you just practice those things and you get better at the same time, like as time goes on. But that's not how you should look at practice or training. Now, I'm making all these videos is because I want to improve. Okay, I want to improve at giving better lectures to my students. I want to improve as a better artist. I want to improve my vocabulary. I want to improve the way I speak. I want to improve my colors, my color theory knowledge. Believe it or not, I can't see a lot of colors properly. Now, practice should be seen as something that you're like trying to defeat yesterday's understanding. Like the purpose of today's training is to defeat yesterday's understanding. That's what practice should be. If you're practicing something, basically means that you understand a particular concept a bit different in the past, but you're practicing to it to like figure out what is wrong with it and to defeat that, right? That is what that should be the main purpose of practice and training. Don't just look at improvement. Improvement will come faster when you change the way you look at practice. And this is Musashi's quote that I'm giving to you, which changed the way I looked at things, which is doing the right practice or the right training to defeat yesterday's understanding. Like for me, I used to think of digital painting as, oh, the colors are kind of weird, then I have to paint it in black and white and then color it again. That was my understanding of how digital painting should be done when I used to watch a lot of the tutorials from YouTube. But then as I delve more into it, I dived more deep into it, I understood that yeah, uh, what I studied was kind of wrong. You can't doesn't have to be that way. You can directly start with colors, right? And it opened a way of how I understood colors traditionally and how I could apply that digitally, right? Now, you guys may be wondering, why is this painting being played in the background? Now, why am I doing this? Why am I recording a painting every time whenever I post a video and I let it play in the background. Now this is where documentation comes in, right? Documentation should be a process where you're documenting whatever that you're doing. A documentation is not supposed to be shared. I have done several paintings and I have recorded several of these videos too, like screen recordings. You have free screen recording softwares nowadays like OBS. If you're using Windows, you got Xbox screen recorder or even the NVIDIA screen recorder. If you're using a Mac, I think QuickTime Player records the screen too, and these things are free. You don't need to pay them. Now, the way I see documentation is documentation of whatever that you do should be a love letter to your future, okay, to your future self, saying that, hey, these are the things that I was doing in the past. Okay, now this future doesn't need to be like the future like many years from now. It can just be future from a few minutes, probably like an hour from now. Okay, now when you do this, you kind of understand that, okay, this is how I'm painting, this is how my subject looks, this is how I see the whole subject, right? Let me show you how slowly that I actually paint. Okay, now this is the full painting over there. Okay, now this is how I usually do the painting. So let's say I'm looking at this, right? So this is one of the recordings, so you can see how carefully I make those marks. Even when I'm using that brush that I showed before, I'm thinking about what marks to make. I'm very slow and very precise at what I'm doing. Even checking the color wheels, like precisely saying that, okay, does that color match? If it doesn't, I change it, right? Keeping the UI really small. Now, I did separate all the layers. I kept it like that so that I can record the thing for the thumbnail of this video, but usually I don't. So usually I keep everything compressed into one. So this was a study that I did before, and you can see how this was completely done using an opaque brush. And I just used, it was just done in one layer, right? This was a study before. So you don't need many layers. The more layers you add, the more difficulty it's going to be. Now, as you can see, as this painting goes on, I'm looking at it and I'm understanding what mistakes do I make. I flip the canvas too much. How am I focused at one area a lot instead of looking at the whole picture? Now that is one of the biggest mistakes that a person does or an artist does. Now this is another quote from Vagabond, one of my all-time favorite manga. Be preoccupied with a single leaf, you won't see the tree. Be preoccupied with a single tree, you will miss the entire forest. Don't be preoccupied with a single spot. See everything in its entirety, effortlessly, right? Now, this quote can be applied to all walks of life. You don't need this quote to be just for painting, when you're art directing, when you're doing a 3D model, when you're doing a study, right? Don't zoom in. Don't zoom in. Don't see all the details. Look at it from a distance. Like this painting is probably going to be seen by, I don't know, like a bunch of people on Instagram or a bunch of people on ArtStation, probably for 2 seconds or a second at the most. Probably like swipe by it and that's it. That's the enjoyment that we get. But when, if it's that point, like, if it's that kind of a mindset, why paint in all the details, right? Now, That's the reason I'm like not going into the details. I could probably do all the typography, but no, just painting it as a study and that's it. If it was a client work, yes, of course I would go down into the details, but for now, if it's just a study, no, to look at its entire detail, entirety, right? Let's look more into this now. Another reason why you should record your painting process as well and look at them. Now that is the secret sauce to why you would improve fast. Okay, apart from practice. Because when you're looking at it, you're trying to look at all the mistakes that you do. You're trying to understand what habits that you have and how to break those habits and how your color matching skills work, if you're zooming in all the time or not, right? All these kind of bad habits gets reflected when you're just looking at your painting, right? And you're just studying and like you're doing your painting but your OBS or whatever is recording in the background and then you watch your process. Now this is kind of done a lot by musicians. Now my brother is a musician and he is recording something on the other room as I'm recording this. He said that they have the headphones on. So my brother is a singer, he's a keyboard, like he plays the keyboards, the guitars, it's basically a multi-instrumentalist. Now, he usually wears the headphones for two reasons when he's recording. One is to hear his own vocals, and two is to see how he sounds in the mix. And they do many takes, many different takes before doing the final cut, right? And even when you're playing the guitar, you probably like set the camera and you record yourself playing the guitar and then you cringe over all the mistakes that you did, right? Now painting is the same thing. Record your process. Look at the mistakes that you're going to make. Regardless of what mentorship that you take, like pay $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, the first thing that you would learn is how to spot your mistakes, right? Every mentor teaches that. And right now I'm teaching that to you, like, not exactly teaching, but like giving you tips on how to spot those. Now, when you record your screen and when you're recording your process, you kind of paint it blindly and you're like, okay, this is how I paint, etc., etc. Now, one of the things that the mistakes that I did and which I paused, like I paused the process and I was looking at my painting video myself was, if you notice on the girls' clothes, I started painting in a lot of those textures. Okay, so let me just fast forward over here. So there you go. I painted in all of that textures, but then those textures, they were not working. I did not like that because I was going way too detailed, right? Whereas the entire painting is not that detailed, and it did not feel very natural, right? So I decided, okay, I'm going to paint over it and I'm going to just smudge it out. So you can see it's all smudged out now. And that was a mistake that I spotted. Now, if I did not record it and watch the screen recording in this between, I would have never changed that. I would have already kept it, right? So this is the reason why you should record your process. Now, this will improve your art skills faster. And this goes for all, like not just for digital painting, but for 3D modeling, for sculpting, anything. Record your process. That will drastically improve. And remember the key points that I said. Keep it minimal, keep things very documentation. So basically recording is documentation. Doing what is difficult, so using just a few brushes, no layers, keeping everything in one layer. And understanding the meaning behind practice, which is the purpose of today's practice is to defeat yesterday's understandings. Okay, I hope this was a good rant, I would say, or more like a talk, or not talk. I hope you guys learned something from it. All right, see ya. Have a good weekend.